Oreshnik.
Oreshnik. Oreshnik. Early this morning, Russia carried out an attack with the Doomsday missile, the hypersonic Oreshnik missile. Although the attack, according to Russian authorities, was a response to last week's Ukrainian attacks on the residence of Russian President Vladimir Putin, in reality, it is clearly a direct message from Russia to none other than Donald Trump, especially after the US attack on Venezuela, the kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, and, above all, after the capture of a Russian oil tanker in international waters by the US armed forces a few days ago. Russia finally responds. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning from Berlin, Germany, at a completely different time than usual. We begin broadcast number 317 of Demolishing Myths Talks. Thank you very much for joining us, and remember to give us a thumbs up. Joining us on this special occasion, following yesterday's early morning attack with the Oreshnik missile from Madrid, Spain, is Mr. Fernando Moragón. Hello, Fernando, how are you? Everything all right over there?
Señor Fernando Moragón. Hola, Fernando, ¿qué tal todo por ahí?
Bueno, aquí no ha caído. Aquí no ha caído el Oreshnik por el momento, pero todo.
Well, it hasn't fallen here. The Oreshnik hasn't fallen here for the moment, but we'll see. That said, yes, a special broadcast given the seriousness of the events. I know this sounds very cliché, the seriousness, the events, and all that, but this time, it's really true. Let's see, as you rightly pointed out, we're in a critical situation. We've started the year in a brutal way, really brutal. With the incidents in Venezuela, with Maduro's kidnapping, with the Saudis, for example, and the United Arab Emirates. In a civil war with proxies in Yemen, with the war in Ukraine, as we're seeing now, fully unleashed. And above all, there's one incident here, something key, I want to highlight it, and that's the famous incident with the oil tanker. Well, there have been several, but still, with the Russian oil tanker, in which the Russians made it clear that it had been an attack on a tanker flying the Russian flag, and so on. Let's not forget that. Although the statement they issued was a harsh one and didn't mention him directly, it was implied. But that's an act of war. We're talking about a ship that is Russian territory that was in international waters and that they've seized. Sometimes people talk about piracy. No, that's not piracy, it's worse. Because piracy would be if a private party, say you and I and a few buddies, went over there and hijacked the tanker. But no, because since it's a state, since it's a state, that immediately becomes an act of war. It's like a declaration of war. Declarations of war aren't made anymore. This would be the equivalent of one. This is extremely serious. And on top of that, Trump has continued, attacking ships and so on. Because there's a fundamental difference here. In the case of the Ukrainians who are already at war with Russia, well, they attack ships and so on. And let's say they have the legal backing of being countries already at war. But in the case of countries that aren't, well, theoretically, because in practice they almost are, but anyway, theoretically, it's extremely serious. Beyond what it means if what Trump is doing succeeds and they start seizing ships left and right everywhere. This would be a blow not so much to Russia as especially to China, because China, being the world's major producer and trader, would have its supply chain disrupted, its trade interrupted. You'd be creating problems for it. That is to say, that's why the response and the statements, both from the Chinese and the Russians, have been brutal. And mind you, we already know that the Russians are, or Putin is, very moderate, meaning the strategic prudence we've talked about many times. But we have to assess, the time has come to get into it, the severity of the attack. A statement has already been released by the Russians saying that this has to do with the attack on Putin's residence near Novgorod in Valdai. This is important because we don't know whether Putin was there or not. That's beside the point.
no sabemos si estaba Putin o no, es lo de menos, quiero decir. Bueno, sí es importante que estuviera o no, pero es que
It matters whether he was there or not. But the thing is that in the official presidential residences of a nuclear power, there's usually a bunker equipped with the necessary elements to control the nuclear system, the nuclear triad, so that if the president, the head of state, happens to be there for whatever reason, they can direct a nuclear war from that location. So once again, we're attacking the nuclear triad. We're attacking Russia's strategic nuclear deterrence systems. And this is extremely serious, and it's not the first time. We're talking here about the well-known attacks, if I'm not mistaken, on 5 strategic bomber bases, with the destruction of several of them.
De bombarderos estratégicos con la destrucción de varios de ellos. Hablamos también de los ataques a los radares.
We also talked about the attacks on the radars used to detect nuclear missile launches, which serve no other purpose than that, coming from the United States. This has reached a point where an unrestrained, out-of-control United States is provoking an escalation of such magnitude that Putin, as I said, not one to make such gestures, has had to do something to stop, or try to stop, we'll see about that, or hold back the Americans, and in passing, also the Europeans, who right now must all be going through large amounts of toilet paper. Because yes. Well, of course, we'll see now, I suppose you have the footage there, what little we have of it, but it's truly impressive. It's impressive. We'll talk about the air missile now.
Fernando, antes de presentar el mapa y comenzar con el análisis en el mapa.
Before presenting the map and starting the analysis on it, 2 self-referential comments about our work, but necessary ones. First, they have labeled us. They label us, and they will continue to label us as alarmists, as exaggerators, because for quite some time now, both you and I have been describing the situation in terms of an increasingly dangerous approach toward a nuclear war. We already seem to be right there, very close. When the bombs start to fall, remember us, remember our warnings, okay?
Recuerden nuestras advertencias, ¿sí? Primer comentario. Ahora el segundo comentario.
First comment. Now, the second one, second comment. Obviously, Putin follows the broadcasts of Demoliendo Mitos, Fernando, because in your last intervention, in your last appearance, you were furious that Russia wasn't responding, that China wasn't responding. Well, Putin finally responded. So Putin, as on other occasions, is clearly following the broadcasts of Demoliendo Mitos. And now, beyond this comment, naturally as a joke, we begin with, yes, I'm going to start with the 2 maps.
Voy a comenzar con los 2 mapas.
The events.
Exactamente. Voy a comenzar con 2 mapas, vale. Fernando.
Exactly. I'm going to start with 2 maps. Okay, Fernando, why 2 maps? Because yesterday Russia carried out 2 major attacks, 2 waves of attacks. The first wave was mostly concentrated in the Dnipropetrovsk region, and especially in the city of Dnipro, mainly with drones in the initial strike. But hours later, an even deadlier attack began. First with the big news and surprise, that red line crossing the map, that red line stretching across Ukrainian territory. The attack with a Kinzhal hypersonic missile in Lviv, in western Ukraine. And then a terrible attack with missiles and drones, focused mainly on Kiev.
Concentrado en Kiev. Esas las 2 olas de ataque del día de ayer.
Those were the 2 attack waves from yesterday, separated by about 4 hours. That's why there are 2 maps. And with that said, we begin to present, logically, the most important part, the Kinzhal missile strike on the city of Lviv. More precisely, not on the city itself, but on a critical energy infrastructure site, specifically the underground gas storage facility called Vilche Bilche Uheska in the Lviv region, according to the transliteration from Russian or Ukrainian. It is the largest gas storage facility in Europe, with its infrastructure located between 690 and 890 meters underground. Nothing more, nothing less. Now we present the images, so far, of the wrath of God.
Estas imágenes propias de un relato de Zeus.
These images, straight out of a tale of Zeus, were captured by security cameras from residences, from houses. Here's the first one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 blocks, as they call them, each one with the possibility of 3 warheads. I'll show it once more, and we'll display other videos that are clearer than this one. It's very fast. Remember that this missile descends at around 10,000 kilometers per hour, which makes it not only uninterceptable, but sometimes practically invisible, right? Like lightning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 6, 6. Another image. This is the first one, here.
And we're not eating the grapes. This one's impressive. Stay tuned.
Pay attention to this one. 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6. Fernando.
Have you noticed how fast the last three were? This. Now the explosions are coming out, but when we see, for example, explosions or attacks, of course, if we take something very slow like drones and so on, you can clearly see them flying, then boom, they hit, or even faster missiles, but this is just spectacular.
That is to say, this. Again, Fernando, that image again, the image again. Attention, everyone, pay attention, and also pay attention to the delay in the arrival of the sound. Just like with lightning, first comes the flash, then the thunder. The speed of light is infinitely greater than that of sound. That's why there's a difference. Pay attention. Okay? You, Fernando, counting this time like that there, okay? Focus. 1, 2. No, my friend, no, focus. The first one is very fast. Again. There we go.
No, it's just incredible. There, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there. It's just so fast.
I mean, it's that the last three go one after another. And there, the 6. And at the end, the 6 spectacular explosions. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And there, the explosions of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Let's start sharing some data. As you rightly said, well, the Oreshnik can later, through use, modify many things, right? First, one thing must be said. This is the second time they've launched it. They previously launched it over a Hypopetrox factory a little more than a year ago, in 2024. And it must be said that these missiles have some special features. They are indeed cruise missiles. Ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles that can reach about 5,500 kilometers. They are intermediate range missiles, and what's peculiar about them, and what we've seen so far, is that they can possibly be equipped with nuclear warheads. But we have to keep in mind that the Russians don't provide much information, obviously. What's notable is that it can fly at around Mach 10, maybe a bit more. That is, 10 times the speed of sound when it strikes. And this makes it, first of all, unstoppable. Calculations indicate that it was launched from the Kasputin Yar launch site, roughly near the Caspian Sea, close to the city of, let me see if I can remember the name now, a very famous city. Well, I'll remember it in a moment. Anyway, near the Caspian, and it traveled about 1,800 kilometers. For this missile, that's nothing. Well, it covered that distance in no time, at an average of about 13,000. Ukrainian sources have estimated around 13,000 kilometers per hour, which is incredible. That is to say,
Fernando, we should naturally remember, perhaps if we didn't mention it at the beginning, well, based on the demolisher's knowledge of these topics, but we should emphasize it anyway, beyond the fact that this Oreshnik Avellano missile, if I remember correctly, right? That's the translation of the word Avellano, the hazelnut tree.
Not very terrifying for a weapon of this kind.
Beyond the fact that this Avellano clearly represents a nuclear missile, conceived as a missile for nuclear attack due to its extreme speed, both this time and during the first attack, they were carried out without a warhead, neither nuclear nor conventional. The missile consists of a body and a warhead.
Un cuerpo y una cabeza explosiva. Estos misiles, lógicamente, responden
These missiles, logically, are the result of strategic planning and are therefore designed to carry a warhead, or, in fact, several warheads, with re-entry vehicles and many technical components, each one maximizing its destructive power. But, as Fernando just mentioned, because of the extreme speed of this missile, even without any kind of warhead, purely due to its kinetic energy, to the missile's own velocity, it produces a terrible destructive effect, right? Without a warhead, it's already devastating. With a warhead, it would have a much greater impact. And with a nuclear warhead, well, I don't even want to imagine that, you know? Once again, the Oreshnik launched relying solely on its destructive speed. And not even, well, no, without interception. Barely caught by some security camera.
Sure. It's like the Russians allow themselves to give notice. In fact, well, it's also true that they do it to avoid confusion so the Americans don't interpret it as a nuclear missile launch. 3 hours beforehand, apparently, they warned the Americans about the launch. 3 hours may not sound like much, but it's actually a lot. That is, the Ukrainians knew when it was going to be launched, but it doesn't matter. It's unstoppable. There's no human system right now capable of intercepting a missile like that. And look, we also have many differences compared to the first one. The first one was the first, let's say, real test in a real battlefield. That is, not a simulated test or one against a mock target within Russian territory, etc. No. Which means it could be said that it was, in a sense, an experiment to see how it worked when attacking, in this case, a large base in Dnipro, a major construction plant, that is, for missiles, that had that above-ground section. It was pretty battered, but it had an underground part where drones, missiles, and so on were still being manufactured. Well, this thing has an incredible penetration capacity. As Ezequiel pointed out, and we'll talk about that now, the largest gas storage facility in Europe has been attacked. Just like that. I mean, I can tell you the name, but it's right here. It's a long one. The strike was carried out against the underground gas storage facilities in Vilche, Bolitsko, Oreshnik, or something like that. Well, and this is, as was rightly noted, said to be in the Lviv region.
En la región de Lwów, como bien señalaba. Este es el mayor depósito de almacenamiento de gas de Europa.
This is the largest gas storage facility in Europe, and it's also one of the hardest targets to reach. Why? Because as Ezequiel Bistoletti pointed out, these underground gas reservoirs are located at depths ranging from 690 to 890 meters. That's incredibly deep. To give you an idea, if we recall the American attacks, when Trump came out acting as if he just had an epiphany, saying, "We've attacked, and our GBU-57s, these regular bombs, that is, bunker busters, have managed to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities." We already said no, that was a lie, that it was a perfect summer story. Anyway, the GBU-57s that attacked the Iranian civil nuclear system, at best, in an ideal situation, which of course never happens, could reach a penetration of 61 meters, which they absolutely can't, not even close. We were talking about it at the time. I was going to say no way, but anyway, we were talking about it then and at most 20, and that's being generous. These are being used against those storage sites. And apparently, what was the main goal? To launch these missiles that could penetrate deeply with the submunitions they carry, to trigger a sort of small earthquake, fracture the gas reservoir, and destroy it. That is, just to give you an idea of what it's capable of. And as Ezequiel Bistoletti pointed out, it's important to mention this because until now, what we had in the world were, well, as Ezequiel said, nuclear missiles known to everyone, that is, with warheads ranging from half a kiloton to the usual maximum of about 10 megatons, which is already quite a lot. And we had conventional warheads that could be more or less heavy, with more or less explosive charge. But this is a weapon that, as far as we know, no one else has except the Russians. They are kinetic energy weapons, with that configuration we've seen in wrestling, both a year ago and now. And this has an explosive, let's say, brutal potential, because at that speed, it accumulates an enormous amount of kinetic energy. Imagine I don't have a missile here, but think that as it descends, the missile at that speed starts to heat up due to friction with the atmosphere, and it generates a plasma around it with extraordinary explosive power. And this also has an advantage. Since it's not a nuclear weapon, it can destroy many things without major issues. It's like a mini nuclear weapon, without radiation, without side effects.
So, watch out. Yes, a word to the wise.
A word to the wise, Mr. Merz, Mr. Steinberg, and Mr. Macron right now, well, they definitely haven't slept tonight, and they must be very, very worried.
Merz's security knocking on the bathroom door, Merz locked inside, possibly sitting on the toilet, but beyond that.
We don't know if Merz's toilet will be made of gold or not, like Ditches's, that corrupt guy who, well, was involved in those kinds of activities with Zelensky, because Zelensky is also corrupt.
More than golden, at this point Merz's toilet must look brown, and pardon the scatological joke. But two things seriously now, Fernando, about something you just mentioned in your explanation. The speed of this missile generates a ball of plasma at its tip. What does that mean? Well, do you remember in school the states of matter?
Los estados de agregación de la materia, líquido, gaseoso, sólido, bueno.
Liquid, gaseous, solid. Well, that's usually how we remember them, how they're presented in school. But in reality, under extreme, very extreme conditions, like in the sun itself, other states of matter appear. Plasma is one of those states that occurs at extremely high temperatures, and indeed, at the head of this missile, the speed generates a ball of plasma, giving it enormous destructive power. Somewhat ironically, it's reminiscent of Dragon Ball Z, right? Those Kamehameha attacks from Goku, with a ball of energy traveling at incredible speed and power. Well, this is something like that. On the other hand, Fernando, let's show another image, because there's a really good one here.
It's just that everything is amazing.
Here's the best one so far. Attention, let's see, yes, over here. And we may be, like in our reactions on Patreon, on top. Okay, now yes. To the left. Another one, let's show it again with us at the bottom. Again. Now yes, it's going really fast. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 6. And there, the hits, the explosions. Go back once more. Up, to the left, attention.
Retrocede una vez más. Arriba a la izquierda, atención.
It's just spectacular. 1, 2, I mean, it's like lightning. Unstoppable. I mean, this is like, wow. I suppose the Ukrainians who were watching it from that great distance weren't affected, but they must have been shocked to see something moving that fast. And well, then there are images, you probably have them somewhere, showing how the sky looked afterward. We'll show them now. This is an image of a kitchen in the surrounding area. The effect there.
They're dealing with the gas. What happened? Did the gas go out? What do you call it? In some countries they call them stoves. What do you call this?
Yes, well, this is a gas stove with burners.
Yes, but the top part, what do they call it?
Yes, the fire, the gas fire.
The gas fire. Yes, in Colombia they call them stoves. In every country they call them something different. Well, they turned on the gas, and suddenly goodbye gas pressure. That's the situation. Images of this, a bit further down. Here's the picture of the sky afterward. This is not artificial intelligence at all. And then, immediately after this, the attacks on Kiev began. Here, a sample. Wow, what a tremendous blast.
Fundamentalmente se atacaron 3 centrales eléctricas.
Basically, 3 power plants were attacked. Once again, right? Once again, they relied on the resilience that, in general, all Soviet-era infrastructure has. To destroy them, you have to hit them 20 times.
Para destruirlas, tienes que atacarlas 20 veces.
Aquí, Fernando, una muestra del efecto.
Here, Fernando, is an example of the effect of the attacks on these power plants. Watch the lights. Suddenly, the city of Kiev is completely in the dark. Once again, everything is shut down.
Una vez más, ahí, todo apagado.
Y lo peor no es eso, quiero decir, que dentro de lo, además de quedarse sin...
And the worst part isn't even that. I mean, besides losing power as we're seeing, they're also running out of gas in the area around the UOF and elsewhere, where the Oreshnik fell. But they're also running out of water in Kiev, and that's really serious. It's true they have snow, meaning that in the worst case you can melt it, but with what if you don't have electricity? The noise of the geraniums, yes, there goes one. Alright, so it's tremendous, because seeing what's happening above your head, well, it gives you the reassurance that it's not going to fall on you, that it's heading somewhere else, but it must be quite a sight. Well, look at this. This is really something. Look there, how people end up getting used to the most terrible situations. There's a man walking his little dog on a leash. Well, a geranium is flying by and he just keeps going. Doesn't run away, he calmly keeps walking his dog. Well, since this one's not going to fall on me, I'll take a look and keep walking the dog.
So that he can do his thing, the out-of-focus little dog. The revelation of his identity, Fernando, logically.
No, well, the little dog. We wouldn't want the Russian spies to get the little dog. I don't think that's their goal, but hey, who knows? Anyway, jokes aside, as I was saying, as you know, the characteristics of this missile are tremendous. In the West, there's no clear understanding of how the Russians manage this because, just to give you an idea, at this hypersonic speed, when the missile re-enters, it's estimated that about 4,000 degrees of heat are generated. That is, 4,000 degrees is hotter than when you go to the beach.
4,000 grados, no sé si es más que cuando vas a la playa. Quiero decir que es muy difícil que materiales...
I mean, it's very hard for materials or an alloy of materials. It seems the main material is tungsten, but that's just speculation. To be combined into an alloy of such quality that it can withstand those temperatures without deforming, without the whole thing becoming a disaster. And that's something they don't know how it was done. And that's incredible. I mean, 4,000 degrees. Well, I don't really know what kind of materials can handle 4,000 degrees well, but that's extreme. And I should also mention, the city I mentioned at the beginning, the one next to the Cosmodrome, in a certain sense of Kapustin Yar, is Astrakhan, or Astrajan, depending on how you pronounce it.
Es Astrakhan o Astrajan, según lo pronuncies. Pues bien,
Well then, this, and I'm quoting directly, they say, because the analysts themselves are asking, can the Oreshnik penetrate that deep? We're not sure, they say. Well, the Oreshnik can carry from 6 to 10 separate blocks, each with 6 submunitions, up to 36 impact elements in total. It might not reach that depth. 690, 890 meters is enormous. But it's deep enough to cause those earthquakes that destroy the gas deposits. And that pinkish image we've seen might have quite a lot to do with the gas that's been released into the atmosphere.
Con el gas que ha sido esparcido en la atmósfera.
Sí, ahora, evidentemente, Fernando, más allá de...
Yes, now obviously, Fernando, beyond the specific objective of destroying this gas storage plant, this gas storage facility, beyond the test itself, because, of course, no one can determine without a concrete test the penetration capacity of one of these missiles against deposits located between 700 and 900 meters deep. This is more of a hypothetical issue than anything else. But here it seems quite clear, Fernando, that we are witnessing a clear message directed at the United States. And on that note, Fernando, this is also a warning to navigators from the last few minutes or hours.
minutos o de las últimas horas.
This depot is very close to the border with Poland.
Sí. Aquí una noticia de la
Yes, here's the latest news. Fernando. Moscow. Trump decided to release 2 Russian citizens from the detained oil tanker's crew. The President of the United States made the decision in response to a request from Russia, according to the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry. Yes, of course, a request without a doubt, but a request with this kind of backing in person.
¿Cuántas veces hemos dicho, a ver, Putin, Xi Jinping, escucharnos?
How many times have we said, come on, Putin, Xi Jinping, listen to us, please? How many times have we said that the bully Trump and those behind him, well, not just Trump, I mean, only understand the language of force and power. And when you act with strength and power, they back down. They had previously said that everyone on the ship, who were Ukrainians, 2 Russians, and a few others of different nationalities, would be put on trial. And Lanzarov and Noblesnitz, and coincidentally, this is just coincidence, nothing else. Summary trials innocent. Summary trials innocent. Well, then we release them.
Juicio sumario inocentes.
Juicio sumario dice, bueno, pues lo libramos porque, no sé, me ha entrado
We let him go because, I don't know, I got caught up in the Christmas spirit. It rubbed off on me, and I still have some left. The Nobel Peace Prize, Fernando. The Nobel Peace Prize for Trump. For Trump, he has to earn it. I mean, as I said, they only understand this kind of language. When you use it, the United States backs down, steps back. Because deep down, they're just neighborhood bullies who only dare to take on the small ones. They go after Venezuela, which doesn't have the capacity to respond to a U.S. attack. They go after African countries. Well, those were the French, but they've tried, for example, to stage a coup against Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, and, well, they managed to stop it. But anyway, in the case of the United States, they'll go after anyone who's small. But this is very important because it's a warning to sailors, a warning to NATO, to the United States, to the European lunatics. I mean, well, let's remember this, if I'm not mistaken, if you look at it, because there's a difference I was forgetting, a fundamental one, between the first SNCC and this one. What's the difference? That the first SNCC, as we say, was experimental, let's say, and at that time it must have had very few, maybe 2 or 3. That is, not now. We don't know what it has because they're not going to tell us. That's clear. But let's remember that after the Oreshnik was launched in November of last year, well, 2 years ago now, Putin ordered it to be mass-produced. And not only that, it was confirmed that they would not only be installed in Russia, but also in Belarus. Lukashenko himself confirmed before Christmas that they were already installed and operational in Belarus. In other words, if they're launched from Belarus, they reach anywhere else faster, because they're generally closer to all the European capitals. Well, this is a warning to all concerned, because if they keep escalating, and that's where the danger lies, as we said, in allowing the Western powers to escalate while committing all those outrages, we're going to reach a point where the Russians will have to respond so forcefully to that escalation that it will become unstoppable. So what do we have here? A warning saying, look, this has hit a very important gas storage facility, because this facility doesn't just affect the Ukrainians, but also one used by Europeans. It's the largest in Europe. In other words, this gas storage site and its surrounding facilities have been completely destroyed. Well, it's a warning saying, watch out, the next one. This is also why they chose a place that's important from an energy standpoint, because it is, and because it's especially effective, but also because of its proximity to the Polish border, which is a NATO country, and to other NATO countries, saying, you might be next. In Poland, let's not forget there's also an American base. Well, actually, there are more, but let's say one big one. It's also a warning to the American bases, saying, look, Maybe there's one in Poland, another in Dresden, Germany, and another one, well, we'll pick another spot.
Fernando, just a couple of things in response to the voices from Malaguero that were heard the other day after your remarks, when you called for a Russian and Chinese response. Some people replied, Fernando wants war. He wants an escalation. No. Obviously, it's quite the opposite. Yes, many people don't clearly understand Fernando's point, because his point is precisely the opposite. Either Russia responds, or China responds now, or something much worse will begin later on. It's what's called deterrence in strategic terms, carrying out a very strong attack before the final escalation begins, so that the final escalation doesn't begin. And also, in response to the voices of Malaguero heard around, phenomenal. But in reality, the Oreshnik missile represents a terrible weapon. Yes, of course, without a doubt it represents a terrible weapon. And as such, we stand for peace and against weapons. But this weapon, or thanks to this special weapon, Russia gained the possibility of an intermediate way out before nuclear escalation. Precisely because this missile has tremendous characteristics in terms of its destructive power, its uninterceptability, even without a nuclear warhead. So when situations of escalation begin, leading directly toward a nuclear conflagration, such as, for example, months ago, Operation Spiderweb, do you remember it?
La operación telaraña, ¿la recuerdan? Cuando los servicios de inteligencia ucranianos.
When Ukrainian intelligence services, obviously backed by British and American intelligence services, and very likely also by the Israelis, MI6, CIA, and Mossad, took part in organizing and carrying out an operation on Russian territory to attack Russia's strategic triad. Their goal was the destruction of Russian strategic bombers. And according to Russian military doctrine, if an attack begins against Russia's nuclear response capability, Russia may, if it so decides, respond with nuclear force. In another context, and with another leader, not someone as level-headed as Putin, thank heaven. Who knows what might have happened? In another context, that could determine the beginning of a nuclear war, a direct nuclear response, a nuclear escalation, and we all disappear. With the introduction of the Oreshnik missile, Russia can respond with enough force for the United States, in this case Trump, to back down, for example, in the symbolic case of the Russian sailors, without the need for nuclear escalation. So here we see an intermediate step, introduced by Russia, thanks to this technical military development. This is the positive aspect of this weapon. We are not presenting it here as something valuable in the sense of, what a great weapon, how many people die, how much death it can cause. No, we do not rejoice in death at all. They are the necrophiles. We want peace. But precisely because we want peace, the need for responses arises, and that's why the introduction of a weapon like the Oreshnik is both new and positive. With this, I'm responding to many comments, some clearly made in bad faith, others perhaps not. Just to clarify, this is how the Oreshnik operates in global geopolitics. One must respond with strength as soon as possible to avoid witnessing a completely uncontrolled escalation, the destruction of everyone, and self-annihilation.
Fernando.
Fernando. Well, there are several reflections, and I'll start by saying just that, or rather by pointing out just that. Let's not forget that the one pushing humanity to the edge of the cliff is the United States with its military delusions. And this is important because, a brief reflection, when the Second World War ended, the United States had three, like the great empires at their peak, at the height of their splendor, three key elements to project its imperial power. First, its economic power. When the Second World War ended, half of the world's GDP belonged to the United States. Its productive capacity at that time was extraordinary, immense. Second, its power, let's say, in the broad cultural sense.
Dos, la potencia, digamos, cultural en sentido amplio.
We've all seen it. That is, the cultural capacity to influence the world was extraordinary in every respect, through film, literature, music, and so on, through its products, Coca-Cola or jeans. In other words, they have culturally colonized the world. But they did it because that cultural creation was so great that it reached everywhere. And the third aspect is the military one. A declining empire is characterized by its inability to project its economic power. The 2008 crisis showed us that perfectly. The United States now has an economy that's a disaster. It produces nothing. The Chinese produce everything. In other words, it has a debt of $38 trillion. This is a dramatic situation. You can see it when you go to the Rust Belt, as they call it, in old industrial cities like Detroit, which are half abandoned. Terrible. It no longer has that economic power. Culturally, it has given its last gasp with wokeism. That is, the last thing it has projected culturally has ultimately been a failure, because it has generated a reaction, a huge rejection among much of the world's population. Most of the world's population, in fact. Let's not forget that we are not the whole world, that the West is a minority, and that in Africa, Asia, much of Latin America, and Europe, there has been a rejection of what we call wokeism, that is, of these utterly delusional ideas of hyper-individualism, and at the same time, hyper-relativism. In which anything goes, in which everything has the same value. It doesn't matter what a flat earther says, or what a man who, with scientific evidence, is proving that the earth is round says. Well, this absolute relativism, that is, all of this has led to decadence, to social disintegration, and it's another failure. What does the United States have left? Military power. When an empire loses its capacity for cultural influence, its economic strength, it will resort brutally to the only thing it has left, its army. That's what we're seeing with Biden, with Trump, and increasingly so because it has less and less of the other things. Hence the danger of the United States and of an empire in irreversible decline, which no longer has anything else to sustain itself as an empire except its military power. And this is being projected right now in a wild way, as we just saw in Venezuela. We're seeing it in Iran. Let's not forget that in the protests in Iran, there are some people legitimately demonstrating against the economic crisis, corruption, and so on. But there's another part, remotely directed, and this has been more than proven, since even one of the leaders coordinating the actions in Iran has been arrested. By the Mossad, that is, by Israelis, the Mossad, the CIA, and so on, who are generating a kind of massive color revolution in a country of 90 million inhabitants. In other words, it's the politics of absolute chaos that's driving us. And I'm going to make a statement that will be controversial. No, more than that. But I'll say it, it's mine. I mean, I'm the only one responsible. And let it be clear, I'm talking about state entities, not populations, or about supranational entities, but not populations. For the survival of humanity, Ukraine must be destroyed. I mean the Ukrainian state, it must disappear. The European Union must be destroyed. NATO must be destroyed. And finally, the American empire must be destroyed. This is an extraordinarily difficult and delicate task which fundamentally must be carried out by China and Russia, since the empire is the world's second nuclear power. But if they are unable to stop this runaway nuclear power, already in a terminal, but extremely dangerous state, the risk of ending up in a nuclear war is extremely high. Extremely high. I mean, right now the Cuban Missile Crisis seems like nothing, you know what I mean? And we were this close to going into a nuclear war. Well, now, even though there isn't, let's say, that kind of stress that would affect the global population, because back then, information was coming out and we were finding out, more or less, in general terms about the conflict at the time. Now it's different. Now, since the major media outlets are doing the exact opposite, spreading misinformation, and will tell any nonsense about Oreshnik and other things, we don't realize that the Russians are making one last appeal, maybe the second to last or third to last, we don't know, to the Americans, telling them, don't keep going down that path. Because if they keep escalating, the result will be a nuclear war. It's not that we want it, but if they force us. Let's not forget one thing. If any of the things Ezekiel mentioned, the attack on strategic bombers, the attack on radars, the attack on Putin's own residence, and so on, the attack on the tanker, on Russian tankers, if any of these things, especially those related to nuclear activity, to nuclear strategic deterrence capability, had happened to the United States, none of us would be here right now. Okay? Let's be clear about that. I mean, I know this is a conjecture, but we wouldn't be here because we know how the United States responds.
Obviously. I mean, Fernando, your words just now were tremendous. Can you repeat them again? Yes.
Look, I'm laughing because I have them written down. I'm writing a little article. Let's see if I finish it, because I started yesterday with all this mess. That is to say, for the survival of humanity, Ukraine must be destroyed. The European Union must be destroyed. NATO must be destroyed. And finally, the American empire must be destroyed. This is an extraordinarily difficult and delicate task, which fundamentally China and Russia have to carry out. Since the empire is the world's second nuclear power, the first is Russia. But it's absolutely necessary. We have to put an end to this. That is, to Ukraine as a state, I mean, to the European Union as a regional organization, to NATO likewise, and to the American empire. Notice that I said North American Empire, not United States. It's something different, and that concept matters. I mean, a country can take on an imperial form or not, that is, an imperial foreign policy. The United States can continue to exist as a state, but no longer with an imperial policy, and no longer as the empire that controls the world and wants to keep controlling it, but rather as just another state in the world, within the concert of other states and nations. But we have to realize that, moreover, Trump has publicly said it. He just said it again yesterday. I couldn't care less about international law. He actually said it. I have the statements somewhere.
I can accompany your words with an additional element. I can add the economic dimension. For the survival of humanity, neoliberal, financial, and digital capitalism, commanded by Wall Street and Silicon Valley, must also disappear. That form of economic organization is leading to the destruction of humanity in the near future, in harmony or in collusion with the American empire, NATO, and the usual suspects. Complementing what you said, from my side, Fernando.
Complementario con lo tuyo de mi parte, Fernando.
No, I completely agree. The thing is, this model of capitalism, as opposed to the sovereigntist model represented mainly by China and Russia, but really by many more countries, is self-destructive. And the worst part is that the ruling elites, knowing that this form of capitalism doesn't have much life left, to put it mildly, are preparing us for a phase that's still hard to assess. Let's call it post-capitalist, so to speak, in which what we'll have are totalitarian states without free market economies. The free market has never really existed, but anyway, without, let's say, liberal economies. As Peter Thiel says, one of the most sinister figures we have on the planet right now, the founder of Palantir. No, what is this about competition? This competition is bad for the economy. What we need are large monopolies. Monopolies, one, not several, not even oligopolies, for different sectors. In tech, one monopoly. In pharmaceuticals, one monopoly. In agriculture, one monopoly. This is what these people advocate, and they do so publicly. There are their writings, talks, conferences, and so on. This, of course, cannot be called capitalism. That's why I call it post-capitalist. But what we must keep in mind is that it's a dystopian model in which technology serves a dictatorship. What do these people want? Nothing else.
¿Qué es lo que pretende esta gente, eh? No pretende otra cosa.
Fernando, back to the map of Ukraine. Bombing around here is very important. How, Fernando? Sorry.
¿Cómo, Fernando, perdón?
Very important, since that's what has been discussed. But also very important are the bombings you mentioned earlier over Kyiv, because what they're already achieving. That's what I wanted us to talk about.
Yes, except for the part about Kyiv, with something already shown, and a bit more about what happened in Dnipro, for example. Pay attention to the city of Dnipro, a very important city. Impressive.
Impresionante.
Completamente a oscuras, uno de los
Completely in the dark. This was one of the main objectives yesterday. Once again, the gas facilities in Lviv, the power facilities in Kyiv, and also multiple targets in Dnipro. In addition to this, very significant territorial advances, one of them in Selene, on the outskirts of Uliapole. Here are the images. Every day, yesterday we were showing advances. Wow, what a blast. Tremendous. Advances and more advances. Some of the Russian advances in recent weeks, very important ones, like Uliapol. Careful, careful, careful. Oh, sorry.
I haven't watched the full videos yet, that's why. Careful, no, because something came up. This isn't really a video, they're extras. Extras from a movie.
Sorry. 1,000 apologies. It was never our intention to show images here. No, but look, I'll be honest too.
Es una opinión particular, quiero decir, esto es muy discutible.
It's a personal opinion. I mean, this is very debatable. Let's imagine we were a television network, a major outlet. I've always been in favor in these cases, in war, which is detestable in itself, of not presenting it as if it were some kind of Hollywood movie. That is, to show it with raw reality, so that people see how terrible, how absolutely disastrous it is, how it brings out the worst and also the best, but mostly the worst in human beings. War. I mean, that's it. I agree with you, Fernando. But now another thing is that this platform we're on, well, might not be too happy about it.
It's an issue, and today we're broadcasting at an unusual time here in Europe. 1:20 in the afternoon. Maybe some kids are watching, and of course we don't want to present this for a children's audience. Well, that's quite an important development there. But even more important than that one is this one here, Fernando. A surprising move from the last day, this push towards Sviatohirsk. This, yes, we've seen before. And here, although there are images of soldiers, no one dead. Here, soldiers advancing through the territory toward, well, there, fighting against a drone, a soldier. No, there you can only see the soldier firing at the drones. This, well, quickly. There, Russian soldiers taking over that position.
Ahí los soldados rusos conquistando esta posición. Epa, perdón, la música tampoco, uno puede. Uno no.
Oops, sorry, the music either, they can't. Because of all this, we're presenting what we can't show here on Patreon. Already more than 600 subscribers on Patreon since it started, just 9 days ago, 8 days. The growth of our Patreon channel has been spectacular. Well, what crazy weather, huh? So unpredictable. Anyway, a very significant Russian penetration in depth, clearly surrounding, in some way, the upper part of the pincer along the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk-Konstanivka axis, the most important defensive line, and naturally also surrounding Lyman.
Fernando,
Intense, huh?
This is extremely important because, little by little, the urban centers closest to the front line are being closed off. The most important ones, like Lyman. Lyman is being gradually encircled, and once it's practically half surrounded, or almost completely surrounded, they will proceed with the final assault on Lyman.
Fernando, the video just showed up, right? Did the video appear just now while I was presenting the updates? Did a video show up or not? Because I wasn't sure that it hadn't appeared. After the video with the unpleasant images, yes, then the video with the little tune appeared. Ah, good, perfect. All right. Sometimes this platform shows one thing on my screen but doesn't display it for you. That's why I was unsure. Sorry, Fernando, for the interruption.
No, tranquilo. No, estábamos diciendo que efectivamente, es decir...
No, relax. No, we were saying that indeed right now the advances toward Lyman will be a key objective, because from Lyman, roughly from the northwest, they'll be able to move toward Sloviansk. So the front has also been reactivated. It wasn't at a standstill, but they've given it more momentum. The front around Kostiantynivka as well. That way, in the end, from one side and the other, they'll be closing in on the main stronghold left in Donetsk, which is basically Sloviansk-Kramatorsk. But watch out, because the power outages we're seeing are crucial, since this is already having consequences. In other words, what the Russians are doing with their bombings is regionalizing the power cuts.
La desenergización. Es decir, vamos a poder apagar determinadas...
That is to say, we'll be able to shut down specific regions, for example, Dnipro, Petrovsk, or Zaporizhia, and so on, without having to shut down all of Ukraine. We've been seeing this in recent days, and this fundamentally contributes to, let's say, undermining the power of the Ukrainian army. Let's not think this only affects the person sitting at home without electricity and so on. No, this affects the Ukrainian army, which needs electricity for many things. Let's not forget that. It's like anyone else, among other things for computers, which for now don't run on diesel. I mean, all electronic systems run on electricity. The militaries do too. So this is essential.
Los militares también. Es decir, que esto es fundamental. O sea, que no se crean que esto... Vamos a fastidiar a los...
In other words, don't think we're not going to mess with the Ukrainians if we let them have electricity. Of course you mess with them, and that's part of war. It means you mess with them in the least harsh way possible, given that it's a war. But above all, you mess with the military, who are your enemies and the ones you have to eliminate. Because let's not fool ourselves. A war, unfortunately, that's how wars are, is when two or more armies face each other. And the one that wins is the one that destroys the opposing army. And destroying it means wiping out its soldiers. Maybe in the future we'll only have drones, and things will be better from that point of view, because we won't be killing human beings. Or maybe we will. Who knows? I mean, but because taking historical experience into account, but of course now, that's how it is. And as I said, we have to, above all, for example, just look at how things change. After what happened with the SNCC, Trump came out again saying, well, Putin's a really nice guy and all that, I really like him. It's what we've always said. If we let them, we'll reach a point where we'll all suffer, even before a nuclear war. Because the moment they start undermining the global economy, it affects all of us. I mean, it makes all of us poorer. If supply chains are disrupted because we're busy attacking commercial ships, that drives up the price of everything. Among other things, the oil and gas we use here to keep warm in the winter. Why? Because costs go up. For example, shipping freight rates. Ships take longer, which also raises prices. On top of that, insurance, which is essential in the entire maritime trade industry, skyrockets. In other words, in the end we make everything more expensive. That is, our gas bill, which is X, will become X to the fourth power.
By the way, Fernando, this inflationary process has already started in Europe. It has already started in the United States. In fact, it began worldwide with the pandemic, and later with the war in Ukraine. An example, maybe something everyday but still relevant, is the price of coffee, for instance, here in Europe, here in Germany. Before the war began, a small package of coffee could have different prices depending on the quality. but maybe the cheapest one, the supermarket brand. Here in Germany cost around €4, right, Fernando? Today, a small package of coffee here doesn't go for less. The cheapest one, huh, Fernando? The supermarket brand, yes, doesn't go for less than €7 or €8. A small package of coffee. Yes, maybe something similar in Spain. No, the same. And it's the same with all other products. We're facing a brutal international process.
Tenemos un proceso inflacionario brutal.
Brutal. You just have to go to the supermarket, the one closest to your home, and then compare it with the one from... We're not even talking about 1980, which is when, for example, this whole major inflationary process began, at least in Spain, along with a brutal loss of purchasing power. No, I mean, compare it with prices from 2 or 3 years ago, for instance. We were already deep into this tremendous inflationary process. And let's not even talk about before the 2008 crisis. I mean, well, and that's how it is, and it's getting worse. In other words, this isn't something that can be easily controlled.
Esto no se controla de manera fácil. Hemos visto la Reserva Federal intentando de una manera un tanto...
We've seen the Federal Reserve trying in a somewhat, let's say, obtuse way, because thinking that policy, that is, inflation issues, can be controlled solely and exclusively through, in this case, the Federal Reserve, or in other cases, national central banks. Let's remember, the Federal Reserve is a private bank. Believing that it can be controlled simply by increasing or decreasing the money supply is at the very least a reductionist approach. In other words, there are many more factors, and you need more tools than just putting more money into circulation or withdrawing it. But anyway, that's what we've been seeing.
Images of the consequences of the attack with the Oreshnik. We're gradually presenting them. We didn't show them earlier because they've been appearing over time. Pay attention to that color on the horizon. It's probably caused by a gas leak. There's also a trail of smoke over there. More and more images of what happened keep appearing, right?
You can see a car here with its headlights on. That's why we can see the snow, a snowy road, and in the background as if it were some kind of... It's hard to describe. I was going to say a sunrise, but no, a sunset. No, something different.
A twilight of strange colors, dear Fernando.
Yes, indeed.
Here, very interesting images. All of this, once again, is emerging as the hours go by, showing only the missile trajectories. And look at the red line. Exactly. This is yesterday's attack, without the drone attack, massive, and, well, with much more irregular trajectories. This is only the missiles, the straight line, the Oreshnik, right?
And they set the distance to the border over here. Minimal.
Next to it. And then, how many missiles were launched yesterday? Well, 10 Iskander-M. I have the list here. You can follow the references to the right of the map with the corresponding colors. 10 Iskander-M, 2 Iskander-M of another type. Sorry, 10 Iskander-M, my apologies. 10 Iskander-M in Klinsky, Bryansk Oblast, and 2 Iskander-M in the city of Bryansk, also in Bryansk Oblast.
It's not that they fall in Bryansk, it's Russian. That is launched from Bryansk.
Launched from... Sorry, in the vicinity of Bryansk. I'm here translating from English, from quite a list.
I have it translated if you want.
Right. 8 caliber missiles also launched from... Now I've read it correctly. Thanks, Fernando, for the clarification. Launched from the frigate Admiral Makarov in the Bay of Novorossiysk in Krasnodar. Russian names don't make it easy for us, Fernando. Not at all. No. Another 8 caliber missiles, also launched from Russia, of course, from the frigate Admiral Essen in the Bay of Novorossiysk, also in the Krasnodar region. 6 caliber cruise missiles, naturally, also from the Varshavyanka submarine, and an Oreshnik launched from, as Fernando mentioned a while ago, Kapustin Yar, the testing ground. the missile launch center.
It's a launch and missile testing center of all kinds and types that the Russians have, one of several they possess. And it's located next to the Caspian Sea, so people can place it on the map in the northern part.
Exactly. The main targets affected in Kiev, Fernando, were the thermal power plants, CHP4, CHP5, and CHP6, the usual ones basically. And well, as mentioned, the underground gas infrastructure in Lviv, along with various targets in the city of Dnipro. Here's the map. Just yesterday, there's also a Tsirkon mark there, isn't there? Oh, no, those are just references, but none along the line, right?
No, none. But notice that this is from yesterday, and the day before there was also a heavy one, especially in the Dnipro and Zaporizhia area, where all the electricity went out too. In other words, it's one thing after another. This is constant. It's true that this has been an especially large attack, but these smaller attacks, with more than 100 drones, happen daily. Here they're talking about more than 400-something drones, for example, in addition to these missiles.
Fernando, my dear, what we can't present here. Where do we present it, dear Fernando? On what platform?
It might be one called Patreon. Exactly, you got it. Prize, here. Here we can speak with complete freedom. We don't have to go around. Well, although we did say a lot of things here, obviously, but certain issues, certain expressions that would be more direct, that is, more accurate, well, here we can't. We have to go around using circumlocutions and such and talking in strange ways, saying, well, no, this or that. Although now, for example, we can say Israel. There was a time, remember Ezekiel, when we couldn't say Israel. We're telling you this now because we can. Back then we had to say, I remember I had to say things as absurd as, no, that country that borders Lebanon to the north, Jordan to the east, and also borders Egypt to the south, and so on. I mean, absurd things.
Here on Patreon, we can present topics such as the interview with Sergei Karaganov, in which, basically, the quintessential Russian geostrategist calls for lowering the nuclear threshold, or, in other words, for Russia to carry out nuclear attacks much more lightly than it does now. That's the interview we discussed and analysed, the one Fernando and I reacted to in the first broadcast. What Karaganov says is always very important. Because you see, it's very important. We had been analysing this many days before. What has happened now?
Notice how important what Karaganov and the hardline faction, let's say, in or around the Kremlin represent. In the end, not Karaganov's hardline version, but rather the softer version, so to speak, is what Putin has had to resort to. In other words, be careful. These are the people who are increasingly shaping the Kremlin's foreign policy, especially regarding Ukraine. So, knowing what they say is crucial.
In the second broadcast, we presented a debate on the phases of political, religious, Jewish, and Christian Zionism. Fernando went back in his analysis to the messiahs of the first century, contemporaries of Jesus Christ. It's a level of analysis based on a debate featuring Jeffrey Sachs, Aaron Rapkin, Manuel Ramos, and Pascal Lopez. That debate was truly top-notch, and we presented it and offered a reaction, a commentary. We reacted. Well, all this happened in just the first week of Demoliendo Mitos on Patreon. Already more than 600 subscribers, 610 now. Please join us there. That's our main request. Your support is valuable. What we can't present here, we present there.
Because, I don't know, this obviously depends on many factors, but my impression, and Ezekiel's, and that of many others we've talked to, friends and so on, who are also involved in this, is that Juan Antonio Aguilar, etc., there's a good chance, that, in the end, they'll end up cutting our heads off on this platform and we'll disappear for good. So we need to have a plan B, and that's what we're working on.
Así que hay que tener un plan B y en esto estamos.
Efectivamente. Bueno, Fernando, transmisión hoy especial.
Indeed. Well, Fernando, today's broadcast is special because of the special events as well. Tonight, like every Friday night in European time, Juan Antonio Aguilar, and most likely El Recargado too, will fiercely go over yesterday's events.
Del día de ayer.
Siempre atentos y muy recomendable Juan Antonio Aguilar.
Always attentive and highly recommended, Juan Antonio Aguilar, because everything he says makes a lot of sense, and he says it with irony and a remarkable ability to strike, dialectically speaking, at that whole bunch of pirates and sellouts among Western analysts, and then at the defenders of disgraceful figures like Trump and company. And above all, let's not forget, with very solid information. And by the way, now that I've remembered, because my mind's a mess, but we'll keep talking. Sources in Washington, let's say, to which I've somehow had access, tell me, and this should always be taken with a grain of salt, that in the attack on Venezuela, with the kidnapping of Maduro, there wasn't much intelligence involved, but apparently there aren't any major traitors who have in any way sold out President Maduro. The key player, of course, was the Mossad, which collaborated in this operation from Trinidad and Tobago and from Puerto Rico. They were the ones who monitored everything Maduro did day and night, and were also responsible for suppressing, mainly through highly advanced electronic systems and cyber attacks, Venezuela's defenses. I'm saying this because that's what I've been told.
Very important, what they're telling me. In Europe, and as always toward the end, after so much news and so many analyses about truly difficult issues, we now present, finally, a little bit of everyday life, the day-to-day, from a slightly lighter perspective. This in particular in Moscow. There's a polar cold wave in Moscow, but in fact, this polar wave is covering all of Europe. Here on the street, I have a window right next to me. Well, maybe not that much snow, but almost. Here in Berlin, the current temperature is minus 12 degrees. Yesterday, there was a lot of snow, and for tonight, a snowstorm is also expected. Schools, for example, are closed here. Many things are closed today. The winter wave is hitting Europe, including, of course, Russia, also Ukraine, Germany, and possibly quite a bit of cold in Spain as well. Right, Fernando?
Alemania y posiblemente en España bastante frío también, ¿verdad, Fernando?
Bastante frío. Aquí en Madrid no llegamos a tanto. Hemos tenido algún día.
Pretty cold. Here in Madrid, it hasn't been that bad. We've had a few days, little snowfalls that cover your car a bit, and that's about it. I mean, the roof of the car and so on. Just a thin layer of snow, but nothing more than that. You know, it's very rare for us to get heavy snowfalls in Madrid. We get one every 50 years or so, like the famous Filomena, which left Madrid. Well, it left us all stunned, because we're so far south. In Spain, yes, indeed, a cold wave, and a cold wave in terms of weather, in the climate. However, as we can see in geopolitics, extreme heat. The year has just begun. I'm honestly afraid that if we've started the year like this, it's only the 9th day of the year, Fernando.
Día 9 del año, Fernando.
Day 9. We're on the 9th, please. Calm down, gentlemen who hold power in the world.
Fernando, in 9 days, bombing of Venezuela, helicopter attack, kidnapping of Maduro, hijacking of a Russian ship, and now an attack with Oreshnik. Dear little Madrid, still less than 10 days.
And right now, a possible attack by Israel and the United States against Iran is being prepared. We don't know when, of course. In a situation where the activities of the Mossad and the CIA in Iran, I've seen shocking footage showing direct attacks on police stations, on officers of different ranks in Iran. In other words, something that's almost insurrectional.
And Greenland is on the countdown too, Fernando.
Well, that's where we get into the pathetic part of Europeans saying, well, let's see, you're not that bad, Mr. Trump and all, don't take Greenland. It has to be said that if Trump is determined to take Greenland right now, he'll take it.
We wanted a quiet start to the year, Fernando, didn't we? Relaxed. But no, events are coercing us, pushing us to work, Fernando. Double shift.
It can't be. We were here working like crazy this morning and all that, when we should be calmly having a little coffee because Fridays are more relaxed in Spain and all that. But no sleep. Because the Russians have this habit of attacking at night. I mean, no, they should attack during working hours. It should be an 8-hour workday, from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening at most. Well, that would be 12, but, something like that. This can't go on. They need to be allowed to sleep. Dear Fernando, a hug, and see you Sunday in your case. And to the wreckers, both men and women, see you tonight with Juan Antonio Aguilar, today with Juan Antonio Aguilar, and Sunday, which is just 2 days away. But at the pace we're going, as Ezequiel says, and I want to tell you what we'll be able to tell, what we'll have to tell on Sunday about these next 2 days. I can't even imagine it. Bye-bye. See you later.
Ciao, ciao.
Hasta luego.